All right, hi, welcome. This is our first week of attempting to do some virtual lessons with us online. So I am lucky enough to kick off this first lesson to all of you fabulous fourth graders at home. We are kicking off the fourth and final reading unit of the year virtually. This unit 4 focuses on historical fiction. This is actually one of my favorite genres, so I'm excited to open this up with you today and to show you what's inside. Over the next 6 weeks, you will have an opportunity to have a live recorded lesson with each of the fourth grade teachers. So next week it will be Mrs. Dorr or Mrs. Runyon, and then the following week we'll switch again. And then week 4, I'll be back to teach another lesson and to read to you. So I'll look forward to doing that as well. Each time we meet, I'm going to ask that you have a pencil and some paper and be ready to take some notes so that you can stop and jot your thoughts on the lesson and the reading and what we're doing, just so that you stay engaged with the work. And that way, when you're reading on your own, you can practice those skills in the book that you're choosing to read. At the end of every read aloud, you will have a question that we're going to ask you to respond to through a Google form, and that link will pop up on your classroom for you to submit your thoughts based on what was read for that day. So the recording will always be in your classroom. You can always come back and listen to the lesson again or listen to the read aloud again, certain part of a chapter that you feel like you needed to read again to get some better understanding. You'll always be able to come back and do that. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off today's lesson, lesson 1 from this fiction unit, historical fiction. So friends, historical fiction is just that. It's a book that is written in a different place and time than you and I live. Historical fiction has always been one of my favorite genres to read from because it transports you back into a time and place that you could otherwise never experience. Historical fiction can be set in times of war or challenge, and you get to live in the book with that character and experience what it might have been like to live during that time and face those challenges. So for today's lesson, we're reading analytically. We're really looking at this with eyes wide open, okay? And our learning target for today talks to you with this teaching point. I'm going to read it to you. It says, today we want to teach you that at the very start of a story, readers pay particular attention to the mood and atmosphere of places in which a story is set. So readers realize that the story will almost never say, well, this shows that trouble is brewing, or this shows a sense of hope. So you must assemble clues to figure out what kind of place this is. And we're going to do this work together right now. We're going to do an example. So in this presentation here, I have a picture from a book called Rose Blanche. And I want us to look at this picture for a minute because this picture shows us a little girl standing on the sidewalk. And the story is about a little girl who lives in a small town in Germany during World War II. The author, Roberto Innocenti, said that he wanted to write a story about a place where something terrible is happening and that most people would choose to ignore. So on this first page, let's think back to our lesson and what we're trying to do today. We're asking ourselves, what clues is this author giving me that suggest what kind of place this could be? We're starting to notice details that suggest there might be change or trouble. Okay, I'm going to read just a little bit of the book, and those questions on the side, I want us to be thinking about what kind of place this is. How does it feel? How does it look? Do you notice trouble brewing? Here we go. My name is Rose Blanche. I live in a small town in Germany with narrow streets, old fountains, and tall houses with pigeons on the roofs. One day, the first truck arrived, and many men left. They were dressed as soldiers. Winter was beginning. Now the trucks follow each other under the school windows. They are full of soldiers that we don't know, but they wink at us. They drive tanks that make sparks on the cobblestones. They are so noisy and smell like diesel oil. They hurt my ears, and I have to hold my nose when they pass by. So what kind of place is this? What does it look like? What does it feel like? I see a small town in Germany. There's narrow streets, old fountain, tall houses, pigeons on roofs. Sounds like it's been an old, quiet place, maybe even a beautiful one at one time. But do you notice that there's trouble brewing from the reading that I just completed? We're paying attention to that when we're comparing with what we see. You can start to get some hints, some ideas. It says the place is starting to be full of trucks and soldiers who wink. They're soldiers and they drive trucks, but they also drive tanks, right? She said they drive tanks. And instead of birds, she said it sounds like engines. It smells like diesel. If you're feeling like me right now, you're probably starting to get the idea that this is becoming part of war, the setting for this story. Do you guys see how I did that? I took what was most expected, the clues that the author gave us at the beginning of this story. I didn't just let them fly right by me. I took a minute to think about it and to think about what is happening. And so right from the start, I'm getting a sense from the setting that trouble's brewing. Okay, we're going to do this. It's your turn now at home. You can jot if you need to, but start just thinking in your mind and collecting some more clues from the words that I read to help us figure out what kind of place this is. Sometimes it seems things haven't really changed, but my mother wants me to be careful crossing the street between all the trucks. She says soldiers won't slow down. Lots of time I walk by the river just looking at it. Branches float along and sometimes old, broken toys. I like the color of the river. It looks like the sky. The trucks are fun to watch. We stand in the doorway as they pass. We don't know where they're going, but we think they're going someplace on the other side of the river. One day, one of them stopped, so the soldiers could repair the engine. A little boy jumped from the back of the truck and tried to run away, but the mayor was standing there in the middle of the street. He grabbed the little boy by the collar and he brought him back to the truck. Then he smiled at the soldiers without speaking, and they thanked him. The sky was gray. The soldiers climbed back into the truck, doors banged shut, and it pulled away. It happened very fast. So compare this now, friends, with what I read before. What are you noticing? What are you hearing? What signs of trouble? How has it changed? So I noticed, she says that the river is getting dirty. It's full of broken toys, right? The author wants you to know that things are looking grim. That means they're not bright and beautiful. They're starting to be dark. And I wonder who those toys belong to. Why would there be toys floating in the river? War is getting closer. There's signs, isn't there, that the soldiers won't slow down and they don't let people cross the street. And even that little boy that jumped out of the truck. And then the mayor brought him back to the soldiers and put him back in that truck. Where is he going? It doesn't feel right to me. Now, I know when you're in class, you're very alert to these details, so I'm sure you're doing the same thing at home. You're starting to describe how this place looks, how it feels. You're paying attention to the author's specific words to give you a good mood on that setting of this place. That's what good, strong readers do. Okay, so today, you know that we're doing something differently. We're online. And so today, instead of me saying, off you go, find a book of your choice, we are going to enjoy reading a book together over the next 6 weeks. And this is a student favorite. This book is called Number the Stars. And I have read this book several times. And every time I read it, I fall in love with it even more. And I know that you're going to love it too. So when I'm reading this today at home for you, I want you to take time to stop and jot your thoughts about what this place um, looks like, feels like, what's the tone, and do you notice if there's trouble brewing? Okay, so on our slide, last slide, this is our anchor chart for the unit. It says readers of historical fiction do these things, and where that heart is today is the heart of our lesson. Friends, you will be successful today when you can read with me analytically, studying the parts that clue you into the facts, feelings, or setting of this book. So you're noticing when, where, what. You're noticing that feeling of what's happening, right? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Do you notice trouble brewing? Take some notes on that today as I read. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1. Why are you running? I'll race you to the corner, Ellen. Anne-Marie adjusted the thick leather pack on her back so that her school books balanced evenly. Ready? She looked at her best friend. Ellen made a face. No, she said, laughing. You know I can't beat you. My legs aren't as long. Can't we just walk like civilized people? She was a stocky 10-year-old, unlike lanky Anne-Marie. We have to practice for the athletic meet on Friday. I know I'm going to win the girls' race this week. I was second last week, but I've been practicing every day. Come on, Ellen, Anne-Marie pleaded, eyeing the distance to the next corner of the Copenhagen street. Please? Ellen hesitated and nodded and shifted her own rucksack of books against her shoulders. Oh, all right. Ready? She said. Go! Shouted Anne-Marie, and the two girls were off, racing along the residential sidewalk. Anne-Marie's silvery blonde hair flew behind her, and Ellen's dark pigtails bounced against her shoulders. Wait for me, wailed little Kirsty, left behind, but the two older girls weren't listening. Anne-Marie outdistanced her friend quickly, even though one of her shoes came untied as she sped along the street called Osterbrigade, past the small shops and cafes of her neighborhood here in northeast Copenhagen. Laughing, she skirted an elderly lady in black who carried a shopping bag made of string. A young woman pushing a baby in a carriage moved aside to make way. The corner was just ahead. Anne-Marie looked up, panting, just as she reached the corner. Her laughter stopped. Her heart seemed to skip a beat. Halt! The soldier ordered in a stern voice. The German word was as familiar as it was frightening. Anne-Marie had heard it often enough before, but it had never been directed at her until now. Friends, did you stop when you heard that and think, oh gosh, something's not right? There's a soldier telling her to stop on the corner. If you're jotting that down, taking note in your mind, you're noticing the setting and an important detail. Behind her, Ellen also slowed and stopped. Far back, little Kirsty was plodding along, her face in a pout because the girls hadn't waited for her. Anne-Marie stared up. There were two of them. That meant two helmets, two sets of cold eyes glaring at her, and four tall, shiny boots planted firmly on the sidewalk, blocking her path to home. And it meant two rifles gripped in the hands of the soldiers. She stared at the rifles first. Then, finally, she looked into the face of the soldier who had ordered her to halt. Why are you running? The harsh voice asked. His Danish was very poor. 3 years, Anne-Marie thought with contempt. 3 years they've been in our country, and they still can't speak our language. I was racing with my friend, she answered politely. We have races at school every Friday, and I want to do well. So Her voice trailed away, the sentence unfinished. Don't talk so much, she told herself. Just answer them, that's all. She glanced back. Ellen was motionless on the sidewalk, a few yards behind her. Farther back, Kirsty was still sulking and walking slowly toward the corner. Nearby, a woman had come to the doorway of a shop and was standing silently watching. One of the soldiers, the taller one, moved toward her. Anne-Marie recognized him as the one she and Ellen always called, in whispers, the giraffe, because of his height and the long neck that extended from his stiff collar. He and his partner were always on this corner. He prodded the corner of her backpack with the stock of his rifle. Anne-Marie trembled. "What is in here?" he asked loudly. From the corner of her eye, she saw the shopkeeper move quietly back into the shadows of the doorway, out of sight. "School books," she answered truthfully. "Are you a good student?" the soldier asked. He seemed to be sneering. "Yes." "What is your name?" "Anne-Marie Johnson." "Your friend, is she a good student too?" He was looking behind her, at Ellen, who hadn't moved. Anne-Marie looked back too and saw that Ellen's face, usually rosy-cheeked, was pale, and her dark eyes were wide. She nodded at the soldier. "Better than me," she said. "What is her name?" "Ellen." "And who is this?" he asked, looking to Anne-Marie's side. Kirsty had appeared there suddenly, scowling at everyone. "My little sister." She reached down for Kirsty's hand, but Kirsty, always stubborn, refused it and put her hands on her hips defiantly. The soldier reached down and stroked her little sister's short, tangled curls. "Stand still, Kirsty," Anne-Marie ordered silently, praying that somehow the obstinate 5-year-old would receive the message. But Kirsty reached up and pushed the soldier's hand away. "Don't!" she said loudly. Both soldiers began to laugh. They spoke to each other in rapid German that Anne-Marie couldn't understand. "She's pretty, like my own little girl," the tall one said in a more pleasant voice. Anne-Marie tried to smile politely. "Go home, all of you. Go study your school books and don't run. You look like hoodlums when you run." The two soldiers turned away. Quickly, Anne-Marie reached down again and grabbed her sister's hand before Kirsty could resist. Hurrying the little girl along, she rounded the corner. In a moment, Ellen was beside her. They walked quickly, not speaking, with Kirsty between them, toward the large apartment building where both families lived. When they were almost home, Ellen whispered suddenly, "I was so scared." "Me too," Anne-Marie whispered back. And as they turned to enter the building, both girls looked straight ahead toward the door. They did it purposely so that they would not catch the eyes or the attention of two more soldiers, who stood with their guns on this corner as well. Kirsty scurried ahead of them through the door, chattering about the picture she was bringing home from kindergarten to show Mama. For Kirsty, the soldiers were simply part of the landscape, something that had always been there, on every corner, as unimportant as lampposts, throughout her remembered life. "Are you going to tell your mother?" Ellen asked Anne-Marie as they trudged together up the stairs. "I'm not. My mother would be upset." "No, I won't either. Mama would probably scold me for running on the street." She said goodbye to Ellen on the second floor, where Ellen lived, and continued on to the third, practicing in her mind a cheerful greeting for her mother, a smile, a description of today's spelling test in which she had done well. She was too late. Kirsty had gotten there first. "And he poked Anne-Marie's book bag with his gun, and then he grabbed my hair." Kirsty was chattering as she took off her sweater in the center of the apartment living room. "But I wasn't scared. Anne-Marie was, and Ellen too, but not me." Mrs. Johansson rose quickly from the chair by the window where she'd been sitting. Mrs. Rosen, Ellen's mother, was there too, in the opposite chair. They'd been having coffee together, as they did many afternoons. Of course, it wasn't really coffee, though the mothers still called it that, having coffee. There had been no real coffee in Copenhagen since the beginning of the Nazi occupation. Not even any real tea. The mothers sipped at hot water flavored with herbs. "Anne-Marie, what happened? What is Kirsty talking about?" her mother asked anxiously. Where's Ellen? Mrs. Rosen had a frightened look. Ellen's in your apartment. She didn't realize you were here, Anne-Marie explained. Don't worry, it wasn't anything. It was the two soldiers who stand on the corner of Ostenbrugade. You've seen them. You know the tall one with the long neck, the one who looks like a silly giraffe. She told her mother and Mrs. Rosen of the incident, trying to make it sound humorous and unimportant. But their uneasy looks didn't change. I slapped his hand and shouted at him, Kirsty announced importantly. No, she didn't, Mama, Anne-Marie reassured her mother. She's exaggerating, just as she always does. Mrs. Johansson moved to the window and looked down to the street below. The Copenhagen neighborhood was quiet. It looked the same as it always did. People coming and going from the shops, children at play, soldiers on the corner. She spoke in a low voice to Ellen's mother. They must be edgy because of the latest resistance incidents. Did you read in the Friedansk about the bombings in Hilrad and Nuremberg? Although she pretended to be absorbed in unpacking her school books, Anne-Marie listened, and she knew what her mother was referring to. The Friedansk, the Free Danes, was an illegal newspaper. Peter Nielsen brought it to them occasionally, carefully folded and hidden among ordinary books and papers. And Mama always burned it after she and Papa had read it. But Anne-Marie heard Mama and Papa talk, sometimes at night, about the news they received that way. News of sabotage against the Nazis, bombs hidden and exploded in the factories that produced war materials, and industrial railroad lines damaged so that the goods couldn't be transported. And she knew what resistance meant. Papa had explained when she overheard the word and asked. The resistance fighters were Danish people. No one knew who, but they were very secret. They were determined to bring harm to the Nazis however they could. They damaged the German trucks and cars, and they bombed their factories. They were brave, and sometimes they were caught and killed. I must go and speak to Ellen, Mrs. Rosen said, moving toward the door. You girls walk a different way to school tomorrow. Promise me, Anne-Marie, and Ellen will promise too. We will, Mrs. Rosen, but what does it matter? There are German soldiers on every corner. They will remember your faces, Mrs. Rosen said, turning in the doorway to the hall. It is important to be one of the crowd, always. Be one of many. Be sure that they never have a reason to remember your face. She disappeared into the hall and closed the door behind her. He'll remember my face, Mama, Kirsty announced happily, because he said I looked like his little girl. He said I was pretty. If he has such a pretty little girl, why doesn't he go back to her like a good father? Mrs. Johansson murmured, stroking Kirsty's cheek. Why doesn't he go back to his own country? Mama, is there anything to eat? Anne-Marie asked, hoping to take her mother's mind away from the soldiers. Take some bread and give a piece to your sister. With butter? Kirsty asked hopefully. No butter, her mother replied. You know that. Kirsty sighed as Anne-Marie went to the bread box in the kitchen. I wish I could have a cupcake, she said. A big yellow cupcake with pink frosting. Her mother laughed. For a little girl, you have a long memory, she told Kirsty. There hasn't been any butter or sugar for cupcakes for a long time. A year, at least. When will there be cupcakes again? When the war ends, Mrs. Johansson said. She glanced through the window down to the street corner where the soldiers stood, their faces impassive beneath the metal helmets. When the soldiers leave. All right, boys and girls, I'm going to pause at the end of chapter 1. I'll record chapter 2 and chapter 3 as a second video. But I hope with today's reading and kicking off this story that you have taken note of several important things that the author has written to help you set that tone, to help you tune into the feelings in what's going on and what you see here with those soldiers on the corners and They don't have coffee and they don't have sugar and butter, and they have to be careful not to be seen and not to be remembered by those soldiers. Be one of the crowd, Ellen's mom says. So many important details to launch this book, and to also bring us back in time to what it was like to have lived here during World War II. So we will continue on with another video for chapter 2 and 3. I'll see you then.